He walked away without a word, vanishing without a trace. Years later, fate delivered a shock. She'd moved on, raising a child. His child. Is it too late to right his wrongs, or will this reunion change everything? Watch until the end to find out. And tell me, would you forgive him? The Reckoning. A father's unseen son. The sky was a pale, late-afternoon canvas, stained with a melancholic orange that dissolved into the gray-blue of scattered clouds. The warm asphalt reflected car headlights as the city pulsed around him, indifferent to the unease that consumed Arthur Davies. He was stuck in traffic, one hand on the steering wheel, the other tapping impatient fingers against his thigh. The day had been long, exhausting. A familiar fatigue weighed on his chest, that invisible burden he no longer even tried to name. But nothing would prepare him for what was about to happen. The traffic light turned red. He sighed and shifted his gaze to the pavement. It was a second, perhaps less. A fleeting moment of distraction that froze everything around him. A few meters away, a woman stood near a park bench, holding a child's hand. Arthur's heart gave a strange, uncomfortable leap. Something about her seemed painfully familiar. The curve of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head when speaking to the child. His breath hitched. Then, she turned. The shock was instantaneous, as if someone had ripped the ground from beneath his feet. Eleanor? The name resonated in his mind like a sharp memory, piercing his consciousness with cruel precision. She was there, in flesh and blood. After years, after all that time, Arthur felt his chest tighten, a suffocating heat rising in his throat. His eyes, however, didn't linger on her for long. The child? The boy had dark, straight hair, like his own. Brown skin, a slightly rounded nose, and a concentrated expression as he played with something in his hands. But it was his eyes that hit him hard. Deep brown, bright, full of curiosity and innocence. Eyes Arthur knew all too well. His own eyes. His blood ran cold. Time lost its form. A wave of adrenaline coursed down his spine, chilling his skin, drying his mouth. He didn't think. He didn't reason. The traffic light turned green, but he didn't see it. He heard distant horns, an irritated driver shouting something, but the world had already faded around him. Without hesitation, he opened the car door and stepped out. His heart pounded fiercely, a frantic drum in his chest. Each step towards her felt surreal, as if he were walking through a hazy dream, a time warp that hurled him into a past he thought he had buried. When he was close enough for her to notice him, Eleanor looked up and their eyes met. It was an invisible blow. Her face hardened instantly. What were once delicate features were now etched by time, by experience, and most of all, by something he had never seen in her before. Coldness. A sharp, cutting coldness, like a newly sharpened blade. Arthur stopped a few paces away, unable to look away. "Eleanor, is that you?" His voice came out hoarser than he expected, laden with disbelief. She blinked, surprised, but quickly recomposed herself. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was firm, controlled, but he noticed the slight tremor in the hand that adjusted the child's backpack. Arthur didn't reply. His mind was fixated on the child, on the absurd detail of that similarity. A screaming truth, impossible to ignore. His chest rose and fell sharply. He felt the words slip from his lips before he could stop them. "Is that child, is he my son?" The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor hardened even further. The air around them seemed to weigh heavily. The child, oblivious to the adult tension, continued playing, unaware that something had shifted in the atmosphere. She took a deep breath, her eyes glinting with a mix of emotions Arthur couldn't fully decipher. Pain, perhaps. Resentment. And something deeper she seemed determined to hide. "Does it matter now, Arthur?" The words were like a slap. His chest constricted in response. Every fiber of his being screamed yes. What could matter more than anything else? But looking at her, seeing how her body remained rigid, as if she were ready to protect herself from any attack, he knew this wouldn't be easy. And perhaps, just perhaps, he had no right to ask. Arthur remained there, standing, unable to react, as Eleanor looked away and pulled the child closer to her. The world around him continued its normal pace, cars passing, people chatting in the distance, life going on, oblivious that for him, everything had just collapsed. The question still hovered between them, but the absence of a reply was already answer enough. The child was his son, his. The revelation. How would you react if you discovered a child you never knew existed? What secrets do you think Eleanor is holding on to? Share your raw emotions in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the continuation of this explosive story. His body tensed, muscles clenched by the impact of the silent revelation. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. Eleanor looked at him coldly, but there was something more behind that rigid facade. A shadow in her eyes, a vestige of the past he himself had destroyed. She sighed, as if carrying an unbearable weight, and then turned away. "Come on, son," she said, her voice firm yet controlled. The boy looked at her and then at Arthur, with the innocent curiosity of a child who didn't yet understand the meaning of that silent exchange. Eleanor gently pulled him along, and Arthur just watched, unable to move. His eyes were fixed on their retreating silhouettes, the vision blurred by a whirlwind of emotions he couldn't name. He wanted to run after her. He wanted to demand explanations, but something inside him whispered that it was already too late. When he finally managed to move, his legs felt shaky. He got into his car and slammed the door shut, trying to catch his breath. But it was no use. Reality had hit him brutally. The impact of the past returned with full force. That night, he couldn't sleep. His eyes remained fixed on the dark ceiling of the room, while his mind spun out of control. The child's face was etched in his memory, every tiny detail. The similarities were undeniable, but it wasn't just that which tormented him. It was the possibility of having made an irreversible mistake. What if he had believed a lie? He closed his eyes, but the images came anyway. The past dragged him inward, pulling him mercilessly. The day everything crumbled returned like a cruel sequence of flashes. He remembered perfectly the feel of the rough paper between his sweaty fingers, the anonymous dossier, left in an unmarked envelope on his desk. He remembered how his chest constricted when he saw the photos, the messages, the proof that Eleanor was betraying him. The words were there, cold and objective, detailing encounters, describing supposed moments he never witnessed, but which, the instant he saw them, he believed without a doubt. The air left his lungs that night. The pain was instantaneous, a deep, throbbing cut in his flesh. He remembered the hatred, the betrayal burning in his stomach, and above all, he remembered how he didn't think. He didn't look for Eleanor. He didn't ask for explanations. He just let the pain speak louder. Anger mixed with wounded pride made him make the most cowardly decision of his life, to leave without looking back. He vividly recalled the moment he packed his things haphazardly, tossing clothes into his suitcase as if fleeing a fire. His heart pounding, his mind clouded by resentment. The incessant ringing of his phone, Eleanor's name flashing on the screen. He ignored it. Then he blocked the number. Now, lying in the darkness, He felt guilt rooting itself inside him like something alive, suffocating. If that child was his son, and every instinct within him screamed yes, Eleanor had been left alone. She went through everything without him. The pregnancy, childbirth, the early years. Every moment that should have been shared, he had lost. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, a bitter taste rising in his throat. He didn't want to remember Eleanor's face when she saw him in that square, but it was impossible to forget. She didn't look at him with surprise or nostalgia, not even with anger. What he saw was much worse, indifference. She had moved on, and he was just a ghost haunting a past that no longer had room for him. His phone vibrated on the bedside table, jolting him from his suffocating thoughts. He picked up the device without much enthusiasm, seeing Andrea's name flashing on the screen. For a moment, he hesitated, but he answered. "Arthur!" Her voice came softly, laden with rehearsed concern. "Are you okay?" He ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "I don't know," he replied honestly. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Does it have to do with Eleanor?" Arthur closed his eyes, feeling the tension spread in his shoulders. "I saw her today." Andrea sighed, a sound that seemed full of meaning. "And?" He hesitated. "She has a son, a boy. He's 4 years old." Another silence. Then, a slightly altered tone. "Are you sure he's yours?" Arthur opened his mouth to answer, but something in her tone made a sliver of doubt infiltrate his mind. "Did she never look for you all this time?" Andrea continued, her voice controlled but full of insinuations. "If he really were your son, why didn't she tell you before?" He didn't know what to say. "Arthur," her voice softened even more, sweet and poisonous at the same time. "What if she's lying?" He felt his stomach churn. I don't know," Andrea sighed. "I just think it's weird. I mean, why now? You've moved on. You've gone on with your life, you have your career, your things, and suddenly she appears with a child?" Arthur remained silent, a knot forming in his throat. Because deep down, the doubt was there. What if Eleanor really was lying? But then, another question struck him like a dry punch. What if he had made the worst mistake of his life? The plot thickens with betrayal. What do you think Arthur's next move will be now that his past is unraveling? Would you confront Andrea? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the next shocking developments. The Reckoning, a father's unseen son. The days that followed were a blur for Arthur. He tried to stick to his routine, but it was useless. The thought gnawed at him from within, like a silent poison. He could barely eat. Sleep was a torment, and the child's face, his son's, seemed to haunt him every instant. But it was Eleanor's expression that truly tormented him. That coldness, the hardness in her voice, the contained contempt. He immersed himself in work, seeking distraction. But not even the chaos of contracts and meetings could ward off the growing unease. Then, when his phone vibrated with an unknown notification, he almost ignored it. But fate showed no mercy. Arthur picked up the phone and unlocked the screen. His eyes scanned the words, and as he read, he felt the air escape his lungs. The message was short, direct. Know the truth before it's too late. Below, attached images. His heart raced. His hands trembled as he touched the screen, enlarging the images. It was a conversation between Andrea and Mark. He read it once, twice, 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. His blood ran cold. If he finds out you orchestrated everything, you're screwed. Don't be an idiot. He'll never know. I made it look like the bitch betrayed him. And it worked, didn't it? Do you think he'll never connect it? Arthur always trusted me. He would never question. And now he's far away, exactly where he should be. The phone slipped from his hands and fell onto the table with a dull thud. Andrea, the only person he trusted after Eleanor, the person who, for years, whispered in his ear, feeding his pain, telling him he had done the right thing by leaving. She destroyed his life. Arthur felt the bitter taste of rage rising in his throat. His entire body tensed. A suffocating heat rose from his stomach to his head, the kind of raw fury he had never experienced before. He didn't think. He didn't reason. He just grabbed his keys and left. Andrea's house was a reflection of its owner, impeccable on the outside, rotten on the inside. Arthur took the steps 2 at a time, his chest heaving, and pounded on the door. Nothing. He pounded again, harder. The doorknob turned. Andrea appeared in the doorway, her hair in a messy bun, wearing a satin robe. Her eyes widened when she saw him there, but she soon forced a surprised smile. "Arthur, what happened?" He didn't reply. He just walked in. She stepped back, hesitant. "What are you doing here?" Arthur didn't blink. His gaze burned with hatred as he threw his phone onto the glass table. "It was you, wasn't it?" Andrea blinked. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb!" he exploded, his voice echoing in the room. He advanced, picking up the images and throwing them onto the table. "This, Andrea! You destroyed my life!" She paled. For an instant, the air seemed to empty from the room. "Arthur," her voice faltered, "you need to listen to me." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Listen to me. That's what I should have done with Eleanor, wasn't it? But you didn't allow it. You made sure of it." She swallowed. "I did it for you." "For me?" He took another step forward. "You ruined my life, her life. You kept me from my own son." Andrea trembled. I just wanted to protect you." Arthur looked at her with disgust. "You wanted to keep me." The truth hung between them like a blade ready to cut. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time he didn't fall into the trap. "You never meant anything to me," he said coldly. "But now, you no longer exist." Andrea sobbed, but Arthur had already turned his back. He walked out without looking back, settling scores. Arthur didn't have to look hard for Mark. He found him as always, slumped at a bar table, the smell of alcohol clinging to his wrinkled clothes. This time, there were no words. Arthur walked through the room with firm steps, ignoring the curious glances around him. Mark looked up, his eyes still unfocused, and didn't even have time to react. Arthur's fist connected with his face forcefully. Mark staggered backward, falling onto a chair. The impact made the glasses on the table tremble. The bar fell silent. He wiped his hand across his mouth, spitting a string of blood. He looked at Arthur and let out a bitter laugh. "I deserved that." Arthur breathed heavily. "You destroyed your own sister." Mark looked down, ashamed. "I had debts. Andrea paid me to help her. Arthur clenched his fists again, but something inside him stopped him from continuing. Mark wasn't worth it. None of this would change the past. He took a step back, the adrenaline beginning to dissipate, but the weight inside him only increased, because now he knew the truth. But did that change anything? The damage was already done. The time he lost with Eleanor and his son would never return. The only thing left now was to try to fix what could still be saved. The truth is out, and the revenge has been dealt. But is this enough for Arthur? What's the next step after such a devastating revelation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the dramatic conclusion. The Reckoning. A father's unseen son. Arthur drove aimlessly, his hands clenched on the steering wheel, his chest heaving as if he lacked air inside the car. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat, a dull drumbeat marking the rhythm of the anguish spreading through his body. The bitter taste of truth burned his tongue. Everything he thought he knew was crumbling, the foundations of hatred and pain falling under the weight of an irreversible mistake. What consumed him most was the memory of Eleanor in the square, holding his son's hand, protecting him as if he were the only world she needed. She didn't need Arthur, and that tore him apart more than any blow he had received. When he finally parked in front of the building where Eleanor lived, he realized his hands were trembling. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, but the tension in his body wouldn't yield. He got out of the car, feeling his steps heavy as he crossed the pavement to the building door. His heart hammered in his chest, a mix of anxiety and desperation coursing through his veins. He needed to see her. He needed to talk to her. He needed to tell her the truth. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, feeling cold sweat trickle down the back of his neck. When he stopped in front of the door, he hesitated for a second, but he couldn't turn back. He clenched his fists and knocked hard. The seconds dragged like an eternity. Then, the sound of the lock turning cut the silence, and the door opened. Eleanor appeared before him, wearing a loose t-shirt and track pants, her hair falling in waves over her shoulders. Her face was tired, her eyes laden with deep shadows, as if she had already fought too many battles that night. When she saw him, her body tensed, and her fingers dug into the wooden door, as if she were preparing to defend herself from something she already expected. Arthur swallowed. "I know the truth." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes darkened. "What truth?" He took a deep breath, the words coming out almost in a whisper. "That child. He's my son, isn't he?" The silence that followed was more deafening than any answer she could have given. Eleanor blinked several times, as if trying to grasp the question, but then her lips curled into a bitter laugh. She shook her head slowly, her eyes clouded by contained fury. "You don't have that right," she said, her voice low. Trembling, Arthur felt a squeeze in his chest. "Eleanor, please, please." She let out an exasperated sigh, crossing her arms. "Now you want to talk about what's fair, Arthur. After 4 years." The pain in her voice was a direct hit. He opened his mouth to reply, but she gave him no chance. "The day I found out I was pregnant, you disappeared, without a word." The floor seemed to sink beneath his feet. "Eleanor, no. Now you're going to listen to me." She took a step forward, and her eyes were red, gleaming with raw emotion. "You just disappeared, Arthur, as if I meant nothing, as if we meant nothing." He tried to defend himself, but the words caught. "During all those years," she continued, her voice breaking with pain, "no call, no message, no sign that you even thought of me. And now, suddenly, you show up wanting answers." Arthur's chest hurt, as if someone was tearing him apart from the inside. "I didn't know." She let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't know. You never wanted to know." The words were like a knife stabbing into his chest. He knew she was right. He knew he fled without looking back, without even thinking there might be another version of the story. "I was an idiot," he admitted, his voice broken. "I should have talked to you. I should have listened to you." She took a deep breath, squeezing her eyes shut for an instant before looking at him again. "But you didn't. You didn't want to listen to me, Arthur. You just erased me from your life." A heavy silence fell between them. Arthur wanted to find a way to fix all this, but he knew apologies weren't enough. Eleanor bit her lip, hesitating, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost a whisper. "Do you know what it's like to wake up every morning and wonder how you're going to raise a child alone? How you're going to explain to him that his father never wanted to know him?" He closed his eyes for a second, feeling a suffocating pain pierce his chest. "I never wanted to." "But it's what you did," she interrupted him, her voice laden with frustration. "You forced me to move on alone. You made me hate you." Those words were a punch to the stomach. He felt his knees weaken, as if he were being crushed by the weight of his own guilt. Eleanor crossed her arms, looking away. "And now you come back thinking you can just step into that role, that you can be the father he never had?" Arthur ran his hands over his face, exhausted. "I don't know, but I want to try." She laughed again, but this time there was something broken in the sound. "You lost your chance." He felt his chest tighten. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but nothing, Arthur. You made your decision. I made mine." Her breathing became irregular. "Arthur." She raised her hand, interrupting anything he was about to say. "I don't know if I can let you be his father." The silence that followed was devastating. Arthur felt his world spin. Eleanor blinked rapidly, pushing away any tears that threatened to fall, and took a deep breath before straightening her shoulders. "Go, Arthur." He opened his mouth, but there was nothing left to say. His feet seemed glued to the floor, his heart pounding against his ribs. But he knew that however much it hurt, that wasn't a decision for him to make. With a lump in his throat, he nodded slowly, took a step back, and, without another word, turned and left. This time, Eleanor was the one who watched him go, the pain of a past mistake. What would you do in Eleanor's shoes? Can she ever truly forgive him? Or is it too late for a second chance? Share your feelings in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the final, emotional conclusion. Eleanor remained there, standing in front of the closed door, unable to move. The sound of Arthur's footsteps fading down the hallway gradually died out, but the pressure in her chest remained overwhelming. She swallowed, blinking rapidly to push away the burning in her eyes. But the truth was, something inside her had already broken again. Her legs weakened. The air seemed too heavy, suffocating. She reached out her hand to the doorknob, as if for a second her mind considered opening that door and calling him back. But reason was stronger. Her fingers closed on empty air, trembling, and she let out a long sigh before stepping back. Her fingerprints still marked by the pressure against the wood, Eleanor turned and walked into the house, her steps unsteady. She felt her heart pounding in her chest in a way that made her ears ring, but she refused to give in. When she finally reached the sofa, she collapsed onto it, holding her face in her hands. She didn't want to cry. She had already cried too much. But there was something cruel about reliving that pain, as if every word spoken that night had ripped open with its own nails the wounds that had taken years to heal. What hurt most was not the anger, not even the resentment. It was the suffocating feeling that, no matter how hard she tried, Arthur still held a space inside her that she couldn't erase. A gentle touch on her arm brought her back to reality. She quickly raised her head, wiping her face with the back of her hands before turning. The child watched her with those deep brown eyes, so similar to Arthur's, his expression laden with sleep and curiosity. "Mommy?" Eleanor's chest tightened. "What is it, darling?" Her voice came out low, trembling. The child tilted his head to one side, observing her intently. "Are you sad?" She forced a smile, but even for a child, the lie was transparent. "I'm just tired, sweetheart." He looked at her for a few more seconds, as if trying to understand something much bigger than he could comprehend, then simply came closer and hugged her waist, resting his face on her chest. Eleanor closed her eyes tightly, feeling tears well up again. Her son, her boy, the only reason she had stayed strong all those years. She ran her fingers through the child's soft hair, stroking him in silence. It was then that Sarah's voice resonated in her mind. "Maybe you should let Arthur get close to his son." Her chest immediately constricted. What if he leaves again? The silence that followed that memory was the same one her friend had given her, because, deep down, there was no answer. Time passed unnoticed. The child fell asleep leaning on her chest, and she remained there, motionless, just listening to his breathing, feeling his small, innocent heart beating softly. What if Arthur didn't leave this time? What if he really regretted it? Doubt crept into her mind like a poison. She looked towards the window where the city glowed outside. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to admit something she had been suffocating within her since the moment she saw Arthur in that square. She still loved him, and that was what terrified her most. Eleanor spent the rest of the night awake, lying in bed, unable to sleep. The weight of what she felt consumed her from the inside out. Admitting to herself that she still loved Arthur was like opening a wound that she had tried to heal for years. She closed her eyes and saw his face, his eyes full of regret, the way his voice trembled as he asked for forgiveness. And no matter how much she wanted to hate him, no matter how much she tried to cling to the pain as a shield, the truth was that a part of her wanted to believe him. But what if she was wrong? What if he left again? She couldn't let her son go through that. The first days after that night were a test of endurance. Arthur didn't come looking for her again, and for a moment, Eleanor thought that perhaps he had understood the message. But then, the next morning, when she took her son to school, she saw a car discreetly parked across the street. He didn't approach, didn't try to force a conversation. He simply stayed there, watching from a distance. And that continued to happen. Arthur was always nearby, but never crossed the boundaries she had set. In the following days, Eleanor realized that he was silently trying to make his presence known. She saw him sometimes talking to the school principal, as if he was asking about the child's routine. One day, picking up the child from nursery, she was surprised by the teacher, who mentioned that the child's father had stopped by and asked how he could help more with the adaptation. Arthur was trying, and she didn't know what to do with that, but it was the first time the child got sick that Eleanor saw the true impact of the change in him. The fever came in the middle of the night. The child tossed and turned in bed, his body hot and trembling, his breathing heavy. Eleanor was used to handling this alone. She prepared the medicine, wetting a cloth to put on his forehead, trying to calm him while whispering words of comfort. But deep down, she also felt fragile. In the middle of that silent night, a knock on the door made her jump. Her first thought was that it might be the neighbor, but when she opened, she found Arthur there. He looked nervous, his eyes tired, as if he hadn't slept. "I heard he's sick," he said, hesitant, holding a bag with medicine and some fruit. "Do you need help?" Eleanor was speechless for a moment. He didn't ask if he could come in. He didn't demand anything. He simply offered his help. She could have refused him. She could have said everything was under control. But for the first time, something inside her hesitated. She stepped back, letting him pass. Arthur didn't talk much that night. He just sat by the child's bed, watching him sleep, and stayed there, as if his simple presence was enough. Eleanor watched him from afar, her heart uneasy. When, at some point, Arthur gently touched the child's forehead, pushing away the sweat-dampened hair, she felt something break within her. He was trying, and she was beginning to see it. The first cracks in Eleanor's defenses. Do you believe Arthur's intentions are genuine? How would you handle this slow re-entry into your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the heartwarming conclusion. The following days brought small, almost imperceptible changes that Eleanor tried to ignore, but found impossible not to notice. Arthur didn't ask for anything, didn't insist on difficult conversations. He simply showed, through subtle gestures, that he was there. When Eleanor came home late from work, sometimes she found hot tea in the kitchen, as if someone knew she would need it. The child began to tell her stories that Arthur read to him when they spent time together, about the games they played, about the drawings they now watched together. Eleanor began to wonder when, exactly, that empty space began to be filled by Arthur. And then, one night, it happened. She was in the kitchen, making herself some tea after a long day, when she felt his presence behind her. It wasn't intrusive. It wasn't suffocating. He was simply there. She turned slowly, and inadvertently, their bodies brushed. It was an instant, a quick, almost insignificant touch. But the warmth of his arm against hers was enough to make her hold her breath. Time stopped. Arthur's eyes met hers, and there was something there Eleanor hadn't seen in years. A charged silence, an invisible weight, something they both felt, but neither dared to name. Her heart pounded in her chest. She pulled away quickly, as if she had touched fire. Arthur noticed, but said nothing. He just observed. And Eleanor knew that sooner rather than later, she could no longer ignore what was happening. The rain beat against the windows when Eleanor opened her front door that night. Exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like an anchor, and all she wanted was a hot bath and silence. But as she closed the door behind her, she realized the house was not enveloped in its usual stillness. On the contrary, a child's laughter echoed from the living room, a light, carefree sound, followed by a deep voice trying, without much success, to sound funny. Eleanor frowned and left her shoes in the hallway corner, walking slowly towards the living room. And then she saw him. Arthur was sitting on the floor with the child between his legs, holding two action figures and imitating exaggerated voices. The child laughed, his eyes shining with joy, completely absorbed in the game. Arthur made faces, dramatized every phrase, and with each clumsy gesture, the child's laughter exploded even louder. Eleanor stood there, unseen, just watching. Something inside her softened. She didn't remember the last time she saw her son so happy. She didn't remember a time when he had felt so safe, so complete. And suddenly, a thought she always avoided hit her hard. What if Arthur had never left? The scene in front of her seemed like an alternative version of the life they could have had. One where Arthur never disappeared, where he was present from the first crime, from the first steps, where her son never had to ask why he didn't have a father like the other children at school. She hugged her arms to her body, feeling a chill that didn't come from the rain outside. Arthur sensed her presence first. He looked up, and for an instant, his eyes met hers. There was no surprise there, no guilt, just something deep and serene, as if he had been waiting for that moment for a long time. "You've really changed," she said, not realizing she had spoken aloud. Arthur held her gaze for longer than he should have, and then smiled. "It took too long, didn't it?" Eleanor looked away, her breathing irregular. "Perhaps, but I'm seeing your effort." It was all she managed to say before leaving, not looking at him again. Later that night, after putting the child to bed, she found Arthur in the kitchen, organizing some papers that were scattered on the table. Eleanor hesitated at the door, watching him. The image of him there, in the heart of the house, seemed as natural as it was painful, as if it were a scene that should have existed much earlier, but was only now taking shape. He looked up when he sensed her presence. "Need help with this?" She took a deep breath, not knowing the exact reason, but instead of refusing, she simply nodded. Arthur pulled out a chair and began to organize the papers beside her. The silence that settled between the two was no longer laden with resentment or pain. It was a new silence, a silence where the other's presence no longer bothered. At one point, their shoulders lightly touched. Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. Her body reacted before her mind. She turned her face inadvertently, and Arthur's eyes were there, fixed on her, deep, intense. Time seemed to slow down. The air grew heavier. There was something between them, something unsaid, something growing in the space that separated them. Eleanor swallowed and looked away first. She wasn't ready yet. But Arthur noticed, and he knew that, little by little, the barriers were beginning to crumble. The walls are coming down. Do you think Eleanor is ready to trust Arthur again after everything? What's the biggest leap of faith you've ever taken in love? Share your stories in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the heartwarming finale. The following days brought subtle, almost imperceptible changes, but they were there, growing between them. Eleanor still tried to convince herself that she wasn't giving in, that her resistance remained intact, but the details didn't lie. The way Arthur's eyes discreetly followed her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he laughed with the child, a sound so familiar that it made something inside her twist, the naturalness with which he adapted to her routine, without invading, without demanding, simply existing there, in the space that was once his, and that, somehow, seemed to be claiming again. That afternoon, while organizing some boxes in the living room closet, Eleanor felt his presence approaching. Arthur was by her side before she could refuse his help, taking one of the boxes and holding it firm. The touch was an accident, a slip, a brief instant where their fingers met. But the effect was immediate. A shiver ran down her skin, and she froze in that moment. He noticed it too. For a brief second, Arthur didn't let go of her hand. The warmth of his skin burned against hers, familiar, yet unfamiliar after so long. Eleanor held her breath, and when she finally pulled away, it was so abrupt that she almost dropped the box to the floor. "Thank you," she said too quickly, avoiding looking at him. Arthur didn't insist. He just nodded, but his eyes remained on hers for a moment longer than necessary. That night, after the child was asleep, Eleanor went out to the balcony for air. The house seemed too small to contain the thoughts swirling inside her, the growing unease. The cold night wind blew against her face, and she closed her eyes for an instant, trying to find a space of calm within herself. It was then that she heard footsteps behind her. Arthur stopped beside her, saying nothing at first. He simply stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at the sky the same way she was. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a different silence, laden with unexpressed meanings. "I still love you, did you know?" His voice cut through the air so unexpectedly that Eleanor felt her heart stop for a second. She turned slowly, but found no hesitation in his eyes. "Only truth." Her chest tightened. "Arthur?" She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to feel. He looked down for an instant, then looked at her again, this time with something firmer in his voice. "I know you can't trust me. I know I destroyed this. But I will keep showing you I'm sorry, for as long as it takes." Her heart pounded fiercely against her ribs. He didn't insist on a reply. He just left his words there, suspended between them, and went back into the house. In the following days, Eleanor tried not to think about it. She tried to ignore how her breathing quickened whenever he was near, how her gaze insisted on finding him, even when she didn't want to. But the truth was that something inside her had already given in. The following week, it was she who invited him to dinner. Arthur hesitated for a second when she extended the invitation, as if he hadn't heard correctly. But he accepted, and that night he was there, sitting at the table, sharing a meal with her and the child, as if that were the future they should have had from the beginning. At the moment of goodbye, they stood at the door for longer than necessary. The child was already asleep, and the house was silent. Arthur's eyes met hers, and Eleanor knew. She knew the instant he let his gaze slide to her lips, the moment she felt her own body react before her mind. She leaned in first. She didn't think. She didn't analyze. She simply yielded. The kiss came like a shock, a reunion, a whirlwind of emotions that had been swallowed and repressed for too long. The taste was of longing, of pain, of desire. Arthur wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer to him, and Eleanor felt her heart beating again, as if waking after a long winter, as if, for the first time in years, she was finally allowing herself to feel. The kiss was like a silent earthquake, shaking everything Eleanor thought she had under control. There were no longer any barriers, no excuses, just the moment that enveloped them, burning like a lit ember after being extinguished for so long. Arthur held her by the waist firmly, but unhurriedly, as if he feared any sudden movement would make her retreat. But she didn't retreat. Her body reacted before her mind. Her hand slid over his chest, her fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt, as if she needed an anchor point. The taste was familiar, yet different. The same Arthur as before, but now marked by time, by pain, by the guilt he carried like a constant shadow. When they finally separated, Arthur kept his eyes closed for an instant, as if he wanted to prolong that moment. Eleanor, on the other hand, opened her eyes first. Her chest rose and fell irregularly, her thoughts disorganized, impossible to sort out. She began, but the words got lost in the air. Arthur opened his eyes, his intense brown eyes meeting hers with a depth that made her stomach churn. He said nothing, just waited. He waited for her to make her decision, for her to define the next steps. And that's when Eleanor realized. He was no longer going to force her into anything. He wasn't going to try to convince her with words, nor demand something she wasn't ready to give. Arthur was no longer the man who one day abandoned her. She took a deep breath, took a step back, without completely letting go of his hand. "I need time," her voice came out softer than she expected. Arthur nodded without hesitation. "As much time as you need." The days that followed were different. There was no more suffocating tension between them, nor the need to prove something all the time. Arthur remained present, but now no longer as a weight from the past. He was there because he wanted to be, because he chose to stay. For the first time, Eleanor realized how much her son also felt that change. The child smiled more, talked more, listened to bedtime stories, and knew that the next day, his father would still be near. It was on a sunny afternoon, at the park, when everything finally seemed to click into place. The child ran ahead, laughing as he played at jumping over the chalk drawings on the pavement. Arthur was by her side, hands in his pockets, his gaze lost in the scene before him. "I'm still afraid," Eleanor confessed suddenly. Arthur turned to her, but didn't interrupt. She sighed, crossing her arms. "Afraid to believe and be disappointed again. Afraid that my son will get attached to you, and one day you'll decide he's no longer worth it." Arthur took a step forward, hesitant, but determined. "I'm never going to run away again." His voice carried an undeniable weight. He extended his hand, fingers slightly open, waiting for her to make her decision. Eleanor looked at that hand, at the man in front of her. She thought about the past, about the pain, but she also thought about the present, about the effort, about the change. Then, for the first time in years, she chose to trust. Her smile was small, almost hesitant, but genuine, as she intertwined her fingers with his. "Then let's build this opportunity together." Arthur squeezed her hand, and for the first time, Eleanor felt the weight on her shoulders finally begin to disappear. They didn't have a happy ending, but they had a new beginning. If you liked this story, please give it a like and leave your comments. We want to know what you think. Thank you for being here.